Quad's first summit has kicked off today with Prime Minister Modi, US President Biden, Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, and of course Japan's Premier joining in this summit. Now, why is it important is the big question. The importance is in the timing of it as well. All four of these countries coming closer for increased cooperation, even as the Chinese threat continues to loom large. Now, on the face of it, officially, formally, in any of their statements, there's no mention of the word China, but it seems pretty apparent when the nations talk about peace in the Indo-Pacific region. Another important point of discussion in the meeting today is cooperation on vaccines. So before we talk about why the Quad matters, let's just play out for you what Prime Minister Modi said as the summit kicked off.
We are united by our democratic values and our commitment to a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Our agenda today, covering areas like vaccines, climate change and emerging technologies, make the Quad a force for global good. I see this positive vision as an extension of India's ancient philosophy of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, which regards the world as one family. We will work together closer than ever before for advancing our shared values and promoting a secure, stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Today's summit meeting shows that Quad has come of age. It will now remain an important pillar of stability in the region.
Tanvi Madan, Director of the India Project, joins us on the show this evening, as does Mukesh Aghi, President and CEO of USISPF. Ambassador Leela K Ponappa also joining us on the show. Welcome to all of you and thank you for speaking with us. Tanvi, just your take to start off with. Why is the Quad important and why does it assume significance right now?
I think the Quad is important because these four countries, four democracies, have a shared, if not identical, vision of the region, of the Indo-Pacific. They want to see a rules-based order in the region. They see it being challenged. They do not say by China, but in many ways by an assertive China. It's not about China's rise, but its behavior, its malign behavior in certain cases that concerns them. They see existing mechanisms, including just ASEAN alone, as being insufficient to deal with this challenge. And a treaty alliance sort of collective security is not possible. And so I think what they found is a coalition, not an alliance, a coalition of the willing and capable, these four countries that bring a lot to the table, who've decided they want to come together to both offer a positive vision, as Prime Minister Modi said, to offer solutions to regional problems, but also to shape Chinese behavior, as well as to shape the favorable balance of power in the region to ensure some amount of deterrence is reestablished in the region.
Ambassador Ponappa, is there any doubt that this is all about China? And then one wonders how far it can go then, because as we speak, India and China have moved ahead to some extent in sorting out differences after China intruded in Indian territory. We've pushed them back. That's been a long, painful process, and some headway has been made there. So is there any doubt that this is all about China?
I think it depends on the terms that you use. You could say it is about China. You could say it is about a rules-based order, as Tanvi mentioned. It is about all the elements that the Prime Minister spoke of, namely an open, free, peaceful, stable Indo-Pacific. And I think anybody who subscribes to that vision really has a role in it. As far as India is concerned, I think we are very uniquely placed, unlike the other three Quad partners, in the sense that We have a long land border with China. We have recently engaged in hostilities, taken casualties, inflicted some. But China continues to intrude on Indian space. I mean, let's not kid ourselves that because there has been a limited disengagement in certain parts of eastern Ladakh, that the issues of Chinese belligerence, assertiveness, particularly on the land border with India, have in any way diminished. That remains. So, yes, you could say it is about China. It's a question of how you perceive or define it. But I think the articulation by India in the Prime Minister's statements and the Foreign Office's statements are that India is not taking a dogmatic or a doctrinaire position. The door is open for responsible behavior. And I do believe that that has to be the keynote on which this whole exercise is premised. In fact, while looking at the preparation for this Quad summit, I wondered what it reminded me of. And it was, in a way, I think it would be oversimplifying it to compare it with what happened after World War II. But you had the Allied leaders meeting to try to work out a post-World War II order. We are emerging out of the shadow of the pandemic. The future is somewhat uncertain. India has had a crisis on its borders in terms of what happened at Galwan last year. And I think this is an exploration really of how to handle the post-COVID order. I mean, you had the Obama pivot. What does it mean? Are America's allies convinced? What is the shape of the regional security architecture, whether it is through bilateral, regional, or even global rules of the road, if you will, starting with UNCLOS? I think these are all questions up there. So it is an exploratory stage, but it is an important one. And it is good that India is engaged.
You know, the question is, what really will it achieve? Mr. Aghi, if you would like to comment on this. Now, officially, from what has been mentioned, we know on the agenda is cooperation on the front of COVID-19 vaccines. There are reports that India could be making the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There will be cooperation on emerging technologies and a peaceful Indo-Pacific region. But in real terms, when will the Quad or this grouping really have heft?
Well, China is seen as a rise of a hard power, and India is seen as a rise of a soft power. I think Quad serves India's objective of not just only dealing with China, but its ambition to be a regional power. When you look at the vaccine diplomacy, you have the Japanese who will fund it. You have the Americans who will provide the Johnson & Johnson technology. India can produce this vaccine almost to $1 per shot, and Australia can do the distribution. So it positions India very well as a soft power, bringing in medicines to the needies around the world at a very, very affordable price. But I think you have to look beyond that. If you look at the combined economies of these four countries, it's around $33 trillion. And India needs investment and technology to achieve its objective of to be a $5 or $10 trillion economy in the next few years. It needs over $1 trillion investment from Japan or US for its infrastructure. It needs substantial technology to deal with issues of cybersecurity. So I think the Quad is not just about China, it's beyond China. And I think when we look at the geopolitical defense Quad, can we translate this into an economic Quad? Can we create a concept of RCEP, but not larger geographies, but the four countries creating a bubble where you can basically provide market access, technology access, and financial infrastructure investment access itself? So from our perspective, and I strongly believe, it's not just about China, it's beyond China, which benefits India very strongly.
You have a very good point there. Will there be economic cooperation for it to really make a difference? Tanvi Madan, I just want your perspective on how this sets the stage for the Modi-Biden relationship as well. It's been pointed out that this is the first multilateral engagement Biden has been a part of and has put his weight behind as President of the United States. There were concerns. There was a lot of talk and speculation about how the Biden and Modi relationship would go further, considering the position that the Democrats had taken before the election. Do you think that Biden's approach to the Quad and the way he's kicked things off will set the tone for this relationship?
So two things. One, I just want to kind of also address this point about when is the Quad really going to do something? This vaccine initiative, if it pans out, is proof of concept. It is very real if you're sitting in Southeast Asia and you haven't been able to get a vaccine, and these 4 countries pooling their capabilities means you or your parent can get a vaccine. It doesn't get any more real than that. Not to mention that they're exercising together in the maritime space. Tomorrow, if there's another tsunami, these countries will be more speedily and effectively able to tackle that than they did in 2004. Or to Mukesh's point, that they are talking about, for example, resilient supply chain. You'll hear that word resilience a lot, increasing and improving the resilience of the entire region. And you can take some of that is about China, some of it is not about China. On the Biden-Modi thing, I think where this is the Quad itself, but also Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin's visit next week, is an important signal, as is the fact that Prime Minister Modi got a phone call quite early, just after Asian Indo-Pacific allies did from President Biden. You've seen Secretary Blinken have multiple calls with External Affairs Minister Jaishankar. You've seen Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, talk to National Security Advisor Doval. What this says is, and I think this Quad meeting being held so early, and before a major engagement with the Chinese, which will take next place.
Tanvi, I'm just going to interrupt you there to go across to the briefing being put out by the Ministry of External Affairs right now. Let's just listen in very quickly.
The historic nature of today's event will be obvious to you. That the 4 countries have upgraded the Quad conversation to the apex level is by itself the most significant outcome. It highlights the importance of international cooperation to address global challenges. The summit today was hosted by the United States, and it is President Biden's first plurilateral engagement. As you know, since President Biden took office, our Prime Minister has had 2 conversations with him. Today's summit provided opportunity for a detailed exchange with President Biden and the other Quad leaders. At the meeting, the 4 countries emphasized their commitment to the principles that unite us and underpin all our national experiences, our shared belief in democracy, pluralism, and market-based economic principles. We are all committed to a free and open, inclusive and rules-based, secure and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. This is a region that is home to all 4 of our countries and to many partner countries, including, of course, our friends from the ASEAN. As you're aware, the approach for our engagement with the region was enunciated by the Prime Minister in his landmark speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018 in Singapore. And the vision of Sagar, or security and growth for all in the region, was also enunciated by the Prime Minister. In his remarks at the summit today, Prime Minister Modi emphasized that the Quad is a partnership for global good. Today's summit saw the Quad leaders adopt a positive agenda and vision, focusing on contemporary issues such as vaccines, climate change, and emerging technologies. Prime Minister said at the summit today that he saw this positive vision as an extension of our ancient philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which, as you know, regards the world as one family. At the summit, the leaders sought to strengthen the moorings for peace, stability, and well-being among the people of the Indo-Pacific and in the global community. Their discussions also extended to post-pandemic recovery, resilient supply chains, and maritime security. And as we, I think, have the Q&A, I'll also try and share with you some of the different ideas that might have come up during the course of the discussions. Now, many of the objectives that were enunciated at the Quad summit are reflected in the concrete takeaways of today's meeting. of which the Quad vaccine initiative is perhaps the most pressing and valuable. The four countries have agreed to a plan to pool their financial resources, manufacturing capabilities and capacities, and logistical strengths so as to ramp up the manufacture and distribution of the COVID-19 vaccines in the Indo-Pacific region. We believe this will speed up the process of post-pandemic recovery and enable families and businesses to put the COVID-19 crisis behind them and move towards normalization. In other words, this is a special initiative which is designed proactively to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 among countries in the Indo-Pacific. And I think the four countries are really leveraging their respective strengths. But again, more on that as we go into the question-answer session. India, of course, we welcome this initiative as it recognizes our own manufacturing capacities and capabilities. We look forward to wholeheartedly and unstintingly participating in this endeavor. This is a vaccine supply chain which is built by trust and being built to convey trust. It is an example of the human-centric international cooperation and globalization that the Prime Minister has referred to on more than one occasion. It is also a validation of our reputation as a reliable manufacturer of high-quality vaccines and pharmaceutical products. During this COVID crisis, that has been much in evidence. I must say that during the discussions, there was a wholesome appreciation by the other Quad leaders on India's role in providing vaccines to 70 countries all over the world under the Vaccine Maitri initiative. And it's important for me to emphasize here that we have, what we are creating under the Quad vaccine initiative are additional capacities that are being created and will not, I repeat, will not in any manner affect our domestic vaccine production and rollout. In a sense, the Quad initiative builds on the Vaccine Maitri experience, as I mentioned, which has been very successful. And it is evidence that Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat are reliable contributors to global supply chains and augment global availability of critical commodities and products. At the meeting, the leaders agreed to the creation of 3 working groups, and these are a vaccine expert working group to implement our path-breaking commitment to safe and effective vaccine distribution.
All right, the Ministry of External Affairs there briefing on the key takeaways from the Quad summit, the first major summit which has been upgraded to the apex level, as the MEA spokesperson said there. The biggest takeaway so far, and we'll keep updating this on our screens as more information comes through that briefing, is the Quad vaccine initiative, which will see all 4 nations pool their resources and enhance manufacturing capabilities so as to provide vaccines for COVID-19 in the Indo-Pacific region. And they were very keen to underline that this will in no way impact India's domestic vaccine manufacture and rollout. Let's get quick reactions from our speakers here. Tanvi, let me come back to you since you've heard that briefing as well. Whatever parts of it we could play out. The big takeaway is the vaccine cooperation, and does it set the stage for much more?
Yes, and I think, it's good they're also setting up working groups, because that means there will be people coordinating and coordinating this in the future. It shows that the Quad, as we've discussed, we were discussing earlier, that it can have a real outcome. It can tangibly affect people's lives. That while, yes, there are China elements to this grouping is not just about that. That can add, it's a value add to the region. That it can be a positive contribution, pooling together these 4 countries' capabilities, and perhaps down the line bringing in other like-minded partners who might want to participate as well, whether that's the Europeans or Asian countries like South Korea or New Zealand, for example.
Okay, Ambassador Ponappa, how do you look at it? Of course, it's not all about China, but even the vaccine plan and the idea to share and pool resources for vaccines comes in the backdrop of China upping up its vaccine productions and wanting to be a provider of vaccines to several countries in the world. So that context is there.
I think one word that was missing from all the statements that we heard, but I think it underlines the whole thing, is credibility. And here I would really point in one sense to the immediate takeaway from the COVID pandemic and this summit, namely the COVID vaccine initiative. But I would also say that a somewhat medium and longer term takeaway is the supply chain resilience initiative. Tanvi had mentioned it, but I think this really has long-term implications in terms of what countries in the region have learned from the pandemic. The kind of economic effects it has had, the kind of policies that India and other countries have had to encounter from a player, it happens to be China, and of what kind of solutions they need to put in place collectively. It's in a way an attempt to make multilateralism, or as somebody has defined it, minilateralism, work. And this really affects the Indo-Pacific region. I think for India, it's also part of graduation along its learning curve of redefining its own neighborhood. I think for a long time, India has tended to equate its neighbors with its neighborhood. Neighbors have a linear relationship with India. You have a boundary, you're India's neighbor. But the neighborhood is a much wider concept. And this is really where the whole logic of the Indo-Pacific comes in. Because the Indian Ocean has a natural continuum into the Pacific Ocean. And this meeting of like-minded countries who have a role, a stake to play in this region, demonstrates that indeed the Quad can become effective. The fact that there are now 3 working groups means there is a program. Earlier, it was a dialogue. Now there is the start of a program with the vaccine initiative obviously taking pride of place in the immediate future. Now, this is really how I see it. It's really an attempt to establish a new regional architecture, security and economic.
Well, in this new regional architecture, where would it stand in terms of other many groupings that we see around the world? Mr. Aghi, I come back to you with the point of how much further we need to go. COVID-19 vaccines and cooperation on that front is a great start. There is a lot of cooperation happening with countries around the world through something like COVAX, which is through the World Health Organization. India, on its own accord, has been sending vaccines to 70 countries so far. Where does this have to go next to really make an impact?
Well, we have a genuine global crisis where the issue is about life and death, about parents, children getting impacted. And if the Quad supply chain can provide affordable vaccine to majority of the population, which impacts every household around the world, it sends a very positive message. So to me, that's a great starting point, especially for India, if it can provide affordable vaccine to citizens around the world. You have to understand, during the pandemic, the only country which benefited financially was China. If you look at its vaccine exports also, for example, for the state of Hungary, it signed a deal at $36 per vaccine, whereas India at the moment is supplying to some of these countries at $2. The question is, can we bring it below $1 so it's more affordable? To answer the second part of your question, where we'll go beyond that, I think you have tremendous opportunity economically between the 4 nations. You have cheap financing available in Japan. India is looking for that infrastructure investment. The trust built on the Quad can percolate down into the economic partnership. US is looking to market access. India is looking for H-1B access to the US. So the potentials are tremendous, and we believe that a starting point is a great starting point of vaccine distribution, and then moving to the economic collaboration in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. We'll have to wait and see if this consistently goes on. Remember, the Quad had its first life in 2007, 2008, but then interest withered away, situations changed, and it was also very dependent on the leaders at that time of these four nations, who was enthusiastic about it and who wasn't. Will a precedent be set now, a solid foundation really, where this relationship can truly bear fruit? So it's an interesting story to watch out for, an exciting day really for geopolitical affairs. And I want to thank all of you for joining us on The Big Story this evening.